And so BadEmpanada, I think he published a video a while ago saying he was undefeated.
Dude, all of my opponents are just gone. Everyone's gone.
Nah, buddy.
God, this is the best Christmas ever.
Ethan Klein from H3H3 podcast, don't really know much about it, but it's big. Like the last time I cared about it, Ethan had just interviewed Bill Burr and it had gone really badly. And he'd sort of, taken a while to recover from that. Well, something much worse is happening to Ethan right now. So if you've tuned in for the next round of overly online political nerds calling each other pedophiles and arguing about who the hot one is, then you should seek medical attention immediately. Ethan Klein, he is currently in a war with BadEmpanada.
That is a fact.
Our BadEmpanada.
God, this is the best Christmas ever.
Yeah, our boy made it. There's been a few little jumps, but this war with Ethan has essentially, like, he's not the equivalent of Ethan at this point, but like could quite easily be, especially as Ethan falls.
Which has resulted in an explosion of his popularity. Here's what you said about him.
No, Ethan. What resulted in an explosion of my popularity is me debunking you. That's what happened. My videos specifically about you are what resulted in a massive explosion of my popularity. And I thank you for that. Thank you so fucking much.
And he's just decimating him because he's debating about Palestine, a subject he actually understands. And so Ethan's just fucked. He's got it's over basically. But the hilarious thing is that every tactic that BadEmpanada points out about Ethan in terms of like the types of things he says in order to avoid actually engaging with the argument.
And Ethan can't even fucking explain what's so wrong, what's so bad about watching my videos. What's so bad about them? What's wrong about them, Ethan? You can't explain that, can ya? That's why you just ignore them.
Who would have known? It figured.
That's why you're scared to debate me, because you know that every single fucking thing you try to gotcha against me, I'll have an answer for you. You dumb motherfucker.
And the kind of personal attacks that Ethan has made on BadEmpanada, which in no way address BadEmpanada's devastating critique of Ethan and Healer's Zionist lunacy. All of it matches exactly what BadEmpanada said to me in response to me bringing up the fact that everything that he had said about Vaush and his insane pedophilia apologia. And
so that's the Vaush update, the update on Vaush after he showed literal drawn cheese pizza on his stream and somehow still has a channel. Interesting. It's especially interesting because you expect someone to get banned from YouTube for that, but I guess they just don't care.
That everything that he had said about Vaush apply equally to queer theory as an academic discipline. And because this is obviously undeniable, as we're about to see, all he could do was the same things that Zionists have to resort to who debate him, i.e. calling him ugly, calling him a pedophile. And he recently mentioned how he harbored a grudge against someone for making fun of his looks. And I never said shit about the way he looks. It's like, why would I'm here to discuss the actual safeguarding issues, not debate which overly online middle-aged spurg is more fuckable.
I was living in a devil town.
This is BadEmpanada talking about Vaush with the pronouns and years and etc. changed so that it applies to queer theory, and all I had to do was essentially change the pronouns.
I mean, he said that same thing like 5 times, yet somehow we're supposed to believe that it's not incredibly suspect that he would bring that up so much for some reason. Like, I'll tell you right now, no one who is not like a secret pedophile would say anything like that. Maybe like once, like as a joke or something, a really shitty joke, but not like consistently over the course of
decades.
Now,
They have
stopped saying this since then because they realized how absolutely untenable it is for
them
as someone who wants to make money online to keep saying shit like this. So
they have
I have to dial it back. There's so much more.
He
said that exact same thing so many times. It is beyond suspect. Jesus, man. Like, there's no context where anything that
they are
saying here is remotely not suspect, okay? Normal people don't utter the words that
they are
uttering here. This is not a thing that people would ever even think to say unless they actually think this. Normal people do not think about the effecality of boy lovers. Even having this thought indicates
queer theory.
Probably a pedo. I'm sorry. And he makes that comparison between child porn and blood diamonds, which makes no sense whatsoever. Because obviously, you can never have ethical child porn. You could have ethical mining of diamonds. But like these are not things that you say unless you are invested in boy lovers
or
forms of incest being moral or legal in some way personally, okay? If
Professor ContraPoints
fans saw this level of evidence for someone being like a covert pedo, for basically anyone they dislike, they would absolutely accept it as more than enough.
ContraPoint is now dealing with alcoholic depressive bouts because of the drama she's received. In this instance, for including a trans medicalist in a 12-second segment.
things are not going well.
Yet instead, because it's they're fucking
a member of the clergy of furries.
They defend this shit, this absolutely abominable shit.
They have
been bringing this up since
1984. They have
been on this train for a very long fucking time. This is not normal. Anyone who does not think about child porn often would talk about it this much. The only time that I've actually ever even thought about child pornography in the last 2 years is because of
queer theorists.
The only time that I talk about it is in regards to
queer theorists
defending pedophilia
or
forms of incest constantly. For years and years and years,
queer theorists
talked about it
Communism
openly.
is based.
Did pretty much everything aside from outright saying that
queer theorists
likes kids
themselves.
And then only stopped doing so once they realized that it was looking pretty bad for
them
in terms of
their
profile. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult. Like
queer theorists
always look at that sort of clip and they're like, oh no, it was just
Gail Rubin
was making a comparison between this exploitation involved in both, blah, 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 blah. What she's saying there is trying to equate pedophilia
or
forms of incest with normal things like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, right? It's like the same thing as if I were to say the Holocaust is the same as me having to get a COVID passport. Right? In that respect, I would be diminishing the significance of the Holocaust and making getting a COVID passport sound far worse than it is. So when you compare communists and homosexuals in the 1950s to pedophilia
or
forms of incest, what you're doing is normalizing pedophilia. That's why
they are
saying that.
They are
trying to make it seem less bad than it really is. God, this is the best Christmas ever. Next thing, God, this is long, man. There's a lot of material here.
Queer theorists
identify
themselves
ironically as a pedophile, and they try to reduce the severity of pedophilia
or
forms of incest, the moral severity of that, so often, so consistently, or at least they did before he realized it was bad for their brand. And there's such a long history of it that you can't look at this evidence and say that there's not something fucked up going on here. I wouldn't be surprised if this would be probable cause for a fucking FBI raid or something. If someone tipped them off, honestly, what the fuck? There's so much here.
Queer theorists
trying to equate two things that are not even remotely equatable. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers, two things that are not even remotely equatable because he wants to make child porn seem more acceptable because from the looks of it, there's very good probable cause to believe that
queer theory is pro
pedophile. Most people, if they were able to disconnect themselves emotionally from someone with this amount of dirt right out there, such a long history of apologizing for or identifying with pedophiles or child porn and stuff, defending it, and what
they are
doing there is a defense, make no mistake, you would think that they were a pedophile. The only reason to think otherwise is because you like this creator. It's more than enough evidence for anything anything short of an actual judicial proof, an actual court conviction. This is more than enough. The average person in
Professor ContraPoints
community, if they saw this exact same evidence but for Destiny or someone who they didn't like, fucking Caleb Maupin or someone, they'd be all over it. It's only because it's
queer theory
that they're not. There's more than enough evidence in all of the shit that I clicked there, and that's not even all of it. I've seen more than that. Far more than enough evidence there for us as normal people. We aren't a court of law, but we are normal people to consider
queer theory to be pro
pedophile. You would think that amount of evidence, that amount of compounding evidence altogether West
An ideology.
is incredibly obsessed with this subject, or at least they were incredibly obsessed until they realized it was bad for their PR, talks about forms of incest and pedophilia so fucking much with actual evidence that Michel Foucault was a pedophile. Like, this is indefensible. Anyone who with the fucking talking points that they have, who goes around the internet like defending
Queer theory.
from pedophilia allegations, is a reprehensible piece of shit too. God, this is the best Christmas ever. Yeah, I have never heard anyone else, aside from actual out and out pedos, defending child pornography, like trying to equate it with things that it's not remotely equivalent to, like talking about how nice we need to be to pedophiles, etc. constantly. Just the pure volume of it and the consistency from
1984
to after
2025.
it's absolutely overwhelming. The
Ideology.
is very likely to be
Pro.
a pedophile, though the only way that we can know for sure is if the FBI gets in there and checks out those fucking hard drives. But apparently this is not enough for
Professor ContraPoints.
this community. Like, this is just immeasurably overwhelming evidence.
These are the key thinkers in the movement. And so when BadEmpanada is like, oh, what's up with Vaush having these crazy ideas? It's like that thinking within the left has a long tradition that hasn't really died off. It goes above ground and underground at different points. But the fight within the gay liberation movement over whether NAMBLA should be allowed in the organization was a real fight that took place up until like 1994. So if you're hearing that for the first time, I imagine it's pretty shocking, especially if you're on the left. But it's absolutely true. And the people who, like, think about if you were in the Catholic Church, right? And you were a Catholic and you really believed that shit. You would think of the people who were using it to do the most heinous things, like, these are the most vile people, and as a good Catholic, like, my responsibility is to not allow them to do that. So likewise, the people in the gay liberation movement who caused a big stink about NAMBLA for decades and decades of being ignored, those were the people that actually cared about the gay liberation movement. And the people who were like, nah, who gives a shit? Those were, as BadEmpanada says,
is a reprehensible piece of shit too.
So, mad about the boys. What is the story behind NAMBLA? Our writer visits the Boy Lovers Summer Convention. And this is John Weir writing in The Advocate, published on August 23rd, 1994 on page 37. So this article was written in 1994. So NAMBLA wasn't allowed in the 25th anniversary of Stonewall, but it was like very much up for debate. And the article talks about how the debate about NAMBLA was an annual debate that happened every Stonewall. There's a sentence that appears in it. One of the NAMBLA activists compares the anti-NAMBLA campaign to one waged by, quote, lesbian feminists who jumped right on the bandwagon. Lesbian feminists is the 90s version of TERF and of what he calls the anti-gay male / child pornography scare. Now, doesn't that sound like the anti-trans scare? So this is what I mean about it going above ground and underground at different points. Like, they lost the battle here, but it just means they adapt and change their tactic. So when the first episodes of The Simpsons were on, there were still people being like, no, I think we should march for pedophiles. And not just people, like the key organizations. The whole reason it became an issue was because the UN wanted to recognize the larger body of gay rights organizations in the US. And someone pointed out to them, NAMBLA is in that group. And then it became like this conflict. And I've heard not only were NAMBLA in the group, but they were the first member of the group. So everyone else that joined knowing that NAMBLA was a member, because that has always been a issue that the gay rights movement has to watch out for, is being, colonized by opportunists, essentially. It's like, what do you think? It was a big part of the movement from the 60s up until the 90s, and then those people who had been key, those people just disappeared. That didn't happen. Just more prominent pedophiles or pedophile apologists played key roles in the trans movement. For example, literally, the man who designed the trans flag publishes pedophilic sex stories.
Your Honor, I thought they were short-stacked goblins.
That's the designer of the flag.
What are short-stacked goblins? I'm glad you asked. So when the YouTuber Vaush accidentally showed his collection of drawn cheese pizza on stream, his excuse that he came up with like a couple of weeks later when he finally addressed it was that he earnestly had believed that the children in these cheese pizza images were actually thick, short-stacked goblins. And he had intended to download short-stack goblin porn. So yeah, according to him, these images of questionably aged individuals committing acts or having acts committed on them by a horse was actually not a questionably aged individual at all and was rather a 1,000-year-old ancient goblin lady who looks like basically a child.
And it's not like they're precious about flags. It feels like new pride flags are constantly spawning in front of us. Like how when all the cards come bouncing towards you when you win solitaire on an old PC. And yet, here we have BadEmpanada, who can't believe that Vaush still has a YouTube channel. Meanwhile, the trans movement has used this flag for decades, despite its creator, or maybe because of its creator, and despite the fact that it has in-group child abuser signaling on the flag itself.
In September of 2022, Helm's partner, Arlene Wagner, announced that the two had been approved as foster parents and were offering their home to children for care. In the post, Wagner made a call for anyone who wanted child care. Monica and I are approved foster parents now.
Oh God, why didn't anybody tell me?
We were asked to provide respite care for a 16-year-old next weekend, but he doesn't seem to be interested in staying with us. Wagner wrote, I'm somewhat disappointed after all this work of getting our home approved. Are there friends out there who would like to drop off their kid for a weekend at our house to get a break? As previously reported by Redux, Helms has a disturbing history surrounding his perception of age and sex. Last year, Helms posted to Facebook announcing his transgender age as 25. Commenters wished him a happy 25th birthday, with one individual noting that by the same logic, his partner, Wagner, would be just 16 years old. Helms has also authored fantasy stories involving themes of age regression, forced feminization, and lesbian body swapping in a collection titled Tales from a Two-Gendered Mind. In one tale titled A Woman Scorned, an Arizona man finds himself being stalked by a young girl who looks no more than 16 years old and whom he initially mistakes for a Girl Scout. The beautiful girl looked at me with her alluring eyes. She announced, "All I want is you. I want to marry you," Helms wrote in the story. The child later reveals herself to be a witch who claims to be older than she appears. Among her powers is the ability to age very slowly, causing her to look far younger than her true age.
Was actually not a questionably aged individual at all and was rather a 1,000-year-old ancient goblin lady who looks like basically a child.
And you'll never stop. Like, that won't do anything. It wouldn't matter if he had a long record. It won't matter when he gets a long record. And so BadEmpanada has been, I think he published a video a while ago saying he was undefeated. Nah, buddy. In exactly the same way, Ethan would never have you on his podcast. You would never have me, or more importantly, someone more qualified than me, to speak on this subject. Because, like, for pretty similar reasons too. Ethan, I imagine, and Healer both probably never thought that their relationship to Israel would have the political consequences that it's having. They were just like, oh, I'm going to go along with what all the normal people around me think.
You know, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of science backing up trans identities, so.
Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose.
This is obviously bullshit. It's anti-materialism.
Materialism. It's Marx for a scientist said it. There's the quote by Engels, I don't know it. BadEmpanada would know it, so that's why he's even more dishonest for pretending he doesn't. But Engels says, These gentlemen think that when they have changed the names of things, they have changed the things themselves, which is exactly what trans is. I have called myself by a different name, and so therefore I am materially different in some way to how I was before the name change.
In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?"
And increasingly accept more and more insane ideas until it comes like crashing into contact with reality.
The man marries her and they have a daughter who similarly does not age in a natural fashion.
You can make your own assessment on that one.
Which isn't a surprise. Seriously, why would you be surprised by that when the core thing that people are saying that they have a problem with about the trans movement oftentimes is that it's granting agency to children that don't have
the capacity
to make a decision, which is so obvious because we wouldn't do the same thing with cigarettes, and we wouldn't say, well, like, young people who smoke are so much cooler and so much happier than young people who don't smoke. And even if they are having their lives shortened by these procedures, as they most definitely are with trans, who cares? Because it lets them be their real rebel selves, and you wouldn't understand what it's like to be a rebel. And yeah, it's exactly the same grooming that like a cigarette company would do. And somehow the left ended up on the side of the corporation. But added to which, it's not just something like driving a car or owning a gun, where it's like, yeah, I can see how that would be a problem for a kid to do that. It's oftentimes like preventing the stunting the development of their body, their genitals, their bones, like.
The young person had very clearly told me and my colleague that my mum wants the hormone more than I do. And when we took it to senior management, Polly Carmichael, she suggested that we refer, even though this was not clinically indicated.
The reason I'm dilating twice a day is because if I miss once, it is so painful and I feel like I'm stuck and like I have to do it, or else like I'm gonna have the worst time like the next morning, or like if I go out and I come back like at 4 a.m. I'm gonna go to sleep and I'm not gonna dilate. But then the next morning when I wake up, I like dread it so much because it's so painful.
I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep.
This is a chemical burn.
I've taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will. The minute she leaves my house, we have a dilation problem.
Bitch, where you at?
I'm out here getting your money.
That's what the hell I thought. Thank you, Grandma.
And the older pimp says,
That is a concern. When you don't have that watchful eye, they tend to go back to old patterns.
Did you know that at least 75% of bitches suffer from some kind of hearing loss? This alarming statistic means that more likely than not, talking isn't the most effective way to communicate with a bitch.
I would be so mad if she goes away to college and that thing seals up. I will wring her neck. Can you imagine?
I wanted to breathe smoke.
Really physically destroying them in a way that like a serial killer, like cutting the breasts off of a teenage girl, is the type of thing a serial killer once did, and now it's like we have to do it to save her. So there's this weird contradiction with trans. When people mention like a weird sex thing, you might have a conversation that goes something like, weird sex thing, oh yeah, there's porn of that. And then someone else goes, oh yeah, there's porn of everything. Of course there's porn of that. But then when it gets to things that have to do with trans stuff, so like men going into locker rooms to perv on women, the violent mutilation of children's bodies, it's all like, oh, who would be into that? Who would even care? Like, what, could you imagine? That's so weird. Why would you even think that that could be a thing? It's just like, what are you fucking talking about? And the classic, oh, if you see anything wrong with it, it's because there's something wrong with you. Which is basically what BadEmpanada, that was the type of thing that he was saying when, in the rare times that we would be able to, like, speak directly on X. Until, of course, BadEmpanada had no choice but to block me, at which point I'd then have to try and catch him somewhere else. There is a group of people who are very into mutilating children's genitals, and they are working in cooperation with the trans movement. This was exposed in the mainstream press. The key trans health organization is WPATH, and the website that hosted pedophilic sex stories about like violently mutilating children was called the Eunoch Archives.
Your Honor, I thought they were short-stacked goblins.
And that organization used to be illegal because up until somewhere, I think in the mid-2000s, it was illegal to publish violent pedophilic sex stories, but the pornography lobby basically sued for that right and won. And so that previously illegal organization came above ground and started working with WPATH, who also colonially exported this model to all the other countries. So there's like OzPath and similar organizations across the Western and probably whole world.
What WPATH is, it stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Basically, they're considered a world authority on certain medical protocols that are recommended for the treatment of what they call gender dysphoria, a highly subjective term. But those things involve certain procedures, medications, for example, puberty blockers for children, and they influence these policies in other countries, which is why they're called the World Professional Association, even though they're based in the US and have been since their inception. They influence policies in Europe. They even have a European branch, EPATH. So they're really organized and well connected on this front. They have conferences. They meet internationally to set these protocols. I don't think there's anything that compares to it because they are setting the guidelines for, I would assume, most, if not all, gender clinics in the US at the moment. They follow the recommendations of WPATH almost to the letter. And WPATH is cited frequently in academic literature. So in terms of long-term follow-up research, to my knowledge, that's not really been required for the hormones, for the puberty blockers especially. It's my understanding that currently the FDA doesn't require that research, although that may change in the future. And it may be being done even. It's not necessarily required.
And I imagine they get away with that because these aren't new drugs. These are drugs that have been FDA approved for different purposes.
Exactly.
So they kind of get around it.
Right. I almost even suspect if it's because they were initially approved for terminal cancer that they were able to get through the door so quickly or so easily without a whole lot of clinical research about their effects. So, I mean, we're speaking now specifically about the drug that's used as a puberty blocker, which is Lupron. Yeah, and we'll get into more about my investigation into WPATH in a second, but I wanted to mention something which I'm working on that I didn't state in this research yet, but I did discover, I have been really curious about the overlap between the sex offender treatment and puberty blockers, because I just keep trying to figure out what is going on here. What's the connection? Like, why would they do that? And I did discover that prior to being the president of WPATH, a man named Eli Coleman, who was the former president of WPATH, was involved in sex offender research programs. So he was actually one of the initial people to push Lupron as chemical castration for sex offenders in the US prior to then recommending it for children. So this idea that the overlap doesn't exist, or that there's no awareness that this is used for chemical castration, is totally bogus. You have the same person in two separate organizations pushing the same drug to chemically castrate sex offenders and then onto children. And he actually had developed something called the Sex Offender Standards of Care prior to, in WPATH, developing the transgender standards of care. And then, of course, John Money was one of the first to pioneer these chemical castration treatments. So the overlap just really can't be overstated. And it's kind of shocking. The more you look into it, the more you find. So we established what WPATH is and why they're influential. But in December, they released the updated draft standards of care. Standards of care are the recommendations for medical authorities on how to treat what they call gender dysphoria. In the new draft standards of care, which is the version 8, they introduced for the first time the concept of a eunuch as a gender identity. A eunuch refers to a man who's had one or both testicles removed, which is castration, surgical castration. Now, when I saw that, I was already familiar with the concept of the eunuch within this whole gender ideology.
You said if anyone ever interferes with Project Mayhem,
You're making a big mistake, fellas.
But in their draft standards of care, they had specifically linked through to a website called the Eunoch Archives. Again, I was already familiar with that because we spoke last year, I think. It was sometime last year when I talked about the castration fetish and puberty blockers. So similar topic that we had already been talking about. So when I saw that, alarm bells went off, I thought, this is insane. How could they be citing this website? Because that website is filled with written pornography, and nearly half of it is written pornography about castrating children violently.
I think they're able to escape being prosecuted for child pornography because there aren't images and videos, because it's
exactly.
Because it's only
it's
written story. So that's out.
That was decided in a 2002 Supreme Court decision called Ashcroft versus the Free Speech Coalition. The Free Speech Coalition is the lobbying arm of the pornography industry in the US. So in 2002, they used works of art to argue that written child pornography or even computer-generated images of child pornography were protected free speech. So that would include things like animation. Of course, now the AI has gotten much more sophisticated. So we're already seeing a problem with that, where that's going to be a nightmare. AI generated child pornography. But basically they were operating, prior to this 2002 court decision, right? So they were sometime around 96, 98 in that era. So after I had done the initial write-up, a few days later, we were able to identify and actually name some of the academics behind the website. I have the names of the academics who were running the site, and they were actually also invited by WPATH to speak at conferences more than once. So starting from at least 2009, this group of 3 men who were main formative members of the website, I'm talking 1998, joining the site, were invited by WPATH to speak on this topic, citing their own research. So they were gathering research from their own site members. We're saying that site members who are writing child pornography about maiming and torturing children were outsourced as resources for information for studies that were used and presented at WPATH conferences, which is mental. It's mental. How is that even? That's not ethical. How is that ethical?
You would think that amount of evidence, that amount of compounding evidence altogether.
You're asking people who write child pornography to give you their impression of what kind of medical care they would prefer, which is madness in itself.
Right. They're framing it as they are the experts on child.
They're the experts
gender
because
dysphoria and
because their own desire is what makes them the expert, apparently.
Right. Who is running WPATH?
Well, currently Marcy Bowers, who is responsible for Jazz Jennings' surgeries.
He's running it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's the current president. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. But he's an interesting one because I've seen a couple interviews where he's backtracking a bit You know, and then people think he's some kind of ally because he's like, well, we think, you know, not every child who says they're trans is actually trans. And everyone's like, oh, good job.
He sees the smoke on the hill.
Some of the people behind me are clearly delighted by the news today from the Supreme Court that when it comes to the Equality Act, it is referring women and sex is referring to biological sex. Now, this will be welcomed by For Women Scotland.
You know, and he's getting ready.
Yeah.
Which says a lot, actually. That's really telling.
Yeah.
And he, you know, in that Duke University lecture a couple months ago, openly said that all of the children who had been put on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, means age 11 or about, none of them have sexual function and never will. And he said that.
The second is, was an observation that I had that every single child who was, or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero. These are of course, these are just assigned male at birth, so trans feminine, and it's because they never in their lives are exposed to testosterone. That doesn't change. That doesn't change. So blockers prevent the rise of testosterone, and they don't really go on testosterone at or around surgery or into adulthood. And so we don't know. They're going to have this sensation. There's no question about that. But are they going to be able to achieve sexual satisfaction? It's important in relationships. And I know that from my work with female genital mutilation survivors, that the lack of being able to be intimate with a partner is very important. And so this is what really raised the red flag for me, is to say, look, we need to have our eyes open about it. I think it's been beneficial talking about it. I know Joe and many others have reported to me, you know, they've changed their approach a little bit in their informed consent models, and that we're talking about masturbation now. We're talking about, okay, that's an area of the body that's got very dysphoric for you, but you know what? It's all a penis is just a large clitoris. I mean, it's all the same material. It really is. So you know, use it for the pleasurable purposes, partially that it was intended, and you know, we'll see what happens. But these are to be answered questions. So, can we avoid puberty and get good adult results? And secondly, how do we assure someone that they're going to be able to be sexually responsive? Do we remove the blockers during the course of their adolescence and let a little bit of puberty come back? Do we delay it a little bit, maybe into Tanner's 3 or 4, maybe before they have their first orgasms? Maybe.
Openly said that all of the children who had been put on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, means age 11 or about, none of them have sexual function and never will. And he said that.
So to be surprised by any of this, like, it really is the same level of denial that you have to exercise to deny the genocide in Gaza. Trans women are women is the woke version of support the troops.
The point of public relations slogans like support our troops is that they don't mean anything. The point of public relations slogans like as a woman is that they don't mean anything.
A sound people identify with is a name, a proper noun like Steve or Frank. It's not a common noun, a word with a definition like typewriter or woman for that matter. They have made the word woman as meaningless as Steve.
Is that they don't mean anything. They mean as much as whether you support the people in Iowa. Of course, there was an issue. The issue was, do you support our policy? But you don't want people to think about the issue. That's the whole point of good propaganda. You want to create a slogan that nobody's going to be against, and I suppose everybody will be for, because nobody knows what it means, because it doesn't mean anything. As a woman. But its crucial value is it diverts your attention from a question that does mean something. Do you support our policy? And that's the one you're not allowed to talk about. So you have people arguing about, do I support
as a Steve?
You know, of course I don't not support them and so on, and then you've won. That's like Americanism and harmony. We're all together, you know, empty slogans, let's somehow join in them. Let's make sure that we don't have these bad people around who disrupt all of our harmony with their talk about class struggle and their rights and that sort of business.
Other similarities include the fact that both groups are targeted for recruitment at a very young age, which minimizes their ability to perceive the scam that is being perpetrated on them. Additionally, once a person has been recruited, their so-called supporters proceed by feeding either group into various mechanisms of industrial slaughter, one for religious sacrifice, the other for colonial expansion.
Like a monkey ready to be shot into space. Space monkey.
As a Steve. And it would be awesome if we could just trade, like the right gives up its most insane idea and the left gives up its most insane idea. And then we'll slowly start to, one, decolonize the world, both domestically and internationally. And, you know, maybe get a clearer vision of who our true enemy is. But he'll get kicked out of the club if he actually acknowledges how deep they go. So he's, yeah, very similar to the situation that Ethan and Gila are in. But so I've got a little promotional cash to throw around at the moment because I wanted to put a bounty. I wanted to debate Kellie J. Keane, and I thought she might be broke enough. So I made a generous offer to pay her $100 an hour for the interview, and she rejected it because the information bubble she is maintaining is worth far more than $100 an hour to her. Recently, she started posting again about how she didn't have any money, so I doubled the offer to $400 US for a debate.
The problem that you have created a protected class of men, essentially, in Zionist men, because I have presented multiple examples to you of men who are either Zionist protesters or IDF soldiers attacking individual women. So it's not a case where you can go, oh, well, Hamas forced them to bomb the hospital for the 5th time. But the thing is that you have created a protected class of men who are allowed to violence against people without you calling them out, because it is part of the political project to make it seem as though Israel doesn't commit the same, isn't part of the same violence against women.
Show me the massacre where the Israelis went in to a fucking music festival. You show me that. You show me an episode where we can all see that for ourselves.
I would pay you to do a longer interview where I could show you videos and show you.
I've seen everything. Thanks so much.
Exactly.
And still no response, because that information bubble is worth an infinite amount to her. And that's the point that I'm trying to say. Like, what could I possibly say during that time that she couldn't correct later and keep going? Unless she's been lying about something very, very fundamental and would have no hope of correcting the record once someone had been able to point out the truth. Holy shit, okay. I think I got Kellie J to delete one of her videos because she had a video that was basically talking about how she'd been debanked and deplatformed from all these different, like, these people won't let her trade money, these people won't give her internet services, these people won't print stickers, all this kind of thing, which is full on, like, it's pretty crazy. But so in the comment of that video, I wrote my offer, and I thought, oh, well, there's no need to screen cap this or record it because this video is always going to be here. But it wasn't, and it seems to have been scrubbed from all the platforms, because I'm pretty sure I saw it on at least Twitter and YouTube. For anyone else who might remember it, it's the one where she says that she needs to buy a new gate because she has security concerns. And yeah, is really doing this hard sell for donations. So the only interaction I was aware of that I got on that YouTube comment was one person who looked like it might have been a freshly created account, but they said, like, you're not as clever as you think you are, or something like that. And I just didn't respond. And then apparently I was pretty clever because then the video disappeared. But also, I directly emailed the comment from the YouTube page to her website, and she wrote me back saying, and I guess whatever I had written, which I don't have a record of anymore, said something like, "So what do you think?" And she wrote back, "What do I think? I think you're a tedious asshole." It's yeah, well, that's because you've eaten, but there's 50,000 children who are about to starve to death and have been doing so for months, and you haven't had shit to say about it. So what you think is the behavior of an asshole leaves a lot to be desired.
احكي لي شو نفسك انت؟
نفسي ارجع زي ما كنت، نفسي شعري يطول، ونفسي أمشط، ونفسي ارجع على المدرسة، ونفسي اصلي وانا واقفة ولا بصلي وانا قاعدة.
خلاص يا رهف تعيطيش شطورة، رهف خلاص تعيطيش شاطرة.
So this is basically the same position that BadSimp NAMBLA has found himself in. The key difference being that BadEmpanada hasn't been blacklisted as thoroughly as Kellie-Kay. So he's in a situation where the allure of a couple $100 is far less than what it would be to Kellie-Kay.
Thank you so fucking much.
I guess the way to sell it is to say, if he steps up and takes this money and then obviously wins the debate because there's no connection between pedophilia and queer theory, then he can take the money and give it straight to UNRWA. He can also rest easy knowing that he will be taking it away from a Zionist, because even if Kellie-Kay doesn't take the money, there are plenty of Zionist TERFs who can replace her. The problem is, his bubble is probably worth to him just as much as Kellie-Kay's bubble is worth to her. But if we can continue to apply pressure, eventually one of them has to burst.
Stop being cowards, because the collective cowardice of you and people like you is what has led to the circumstances of today. Though the only way that we can know for sure is if the FBI gets in there and checks out those fucking hard drives.
If you want to talk about the deep discomfort of the arts, dive in. So,